of Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this conversation. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. There's nothing better to really celebrate Human Rights Day than Martin Luther King III. He's a champion of human rights. He has been working with us at UNESCO to really build a strong agenda to the defense of human rights. Welcome, Martin. Great to have you here.
Thank you. So honored to have the opportunity, particularly on Human Rights Day.
And actually, we are being mainstreamed in Martin's Facebook account, in UNESCO Facebook account. And please, friends, feel free to tag us. Feel free to use your own hashtags. You see some of the lines that we are using to portray this event. And we will be happy to hear from you how you see this conversation going. No need for introduction. Martin Luther King is a real defender of human rights, an advocate, a community mobilizer, and a figure that is preserving the fantastic legacy of his family, of his father that we all revere, but that come to this new age in which we really need to step up the efforts. The world is telling us, COVID is telling us, that human rights are not gained. We need to every day earn them, every day protect them. So my first question to Martin is to ask him how you see human rights today, 20 years after Durban, so many years after the very first declaration. Where are we now? How you see the protection, the defense, the promotion of human rights? Martin, the floor is yours.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that question, Gabriela. And as I think about human rights, I am excited about the prospect of change, but greatly disappointed in our world community for where we are. For it seems like violations are occurring more and more, as opposed to less and less, although we're making change. I don't want anyone to ever think we're not making progress. When we think about the fact that, 20 years ago, the World Conference Against Racism, Xenophobia, and other related intolerances at Durban, an amazing document and plan of action was created. But the United States and Israel did not think that it was proper to single out one country for criticism. But whatever one thinks about the Durban Declaration, the plan in action, and really our excellent documents that say slavery and the slave trade, segregation and apartheid were crimes against humanity. Now, what we see today, literally 20 years later, is the emergence of this concept called nationalism in the United States. We see it in Europe, in certain countries in Europe. We see it in South America. We even see nationalism in India, and we see nationalism in parts of Africa, where discrimination and oppression is fostered and practiced. Now, the hope and the bright light is the fact that we have all these young people who are engaged all over the world. Tragically, here in the United States, there have been many deaths of Black men and women by policemen. And the one that sort of caught the attention of the whole world was the tragic killing of George Floyd that we all saw. Interestingly enough, these killings have taken place over and over again, but the George Floyd one happened right in the middle of the world pandemic, where all of us were at home, not able to go to work, not able to really leave our homes. We were able to see instantly what was happening on television, see a police officer in the United States become judge, jury, and executioner all in one, and tragically kill a human being. And I believe that galvanized young people throughout this nation. In the United States, we had every state there was a demonstration. There were a large number of white people. In fact, more whites involved, I think, than ever in every state in this country, along with blacks, along with Latinos and Hispanics, along with Native Americans, along with people from every ethnic group, saying that Black Lives Matter. But also we saw that in Europe. We saw that in Australia. We saw that in South America, and we saw it on the African continent. So the whole world was galvanized to address or look at this issue called race, which means that the future is great. And the fact that in the United States, Americans came together, along with 81 million people, elected a different president who will, I believe, build coalitions and repair the work, repair some of the things that the previous or the current, this administration, as you may know, the Trump administration is still in, but on January 20th, President-elect Biden will be installed with the first Black woman vice president of the United States, and first actually elected to that high office in the land. They will be installed on January 20th, and a new administration will re-engage the United States with the world community around climate change and so many other issues. But there's still a group of young people who are fighting every day and have to stay on the battlefield.
You really brought a lot of very important points to this conversation, Martin, and it doesn't go without notice to our public that yes, the very first time you have a Black woman as vice president. So kudos to the U.S. and to those that brought Kamala Harris, but also the fact that the messages we are receiving in terms of how this issue of discrimination, of racism, came from bottom up, from this community commitment of all these people that were on the streets, but that needs to be translated into very strong institutional, legal, and of course, mindsets. And mindset is very important to change. And UNESCO is stepping up the efforts. The members are asking us to step up the efforts. But you also mentioned, Martin, the question of climate. And I want to bring to our friends in the platform in Facebook the fact that Yolanda, your daughter, is also pushing for climate justice. And you know, when we see what is happening in COVID, which is always the most vulnerable that are having the highest toll, we know that with the climate emergency, again, those that have been more vulnerable, that have been at the bottom, those that have this memory, as you say, memory of slavery, memory of apartheid, memory of so many disgraces in the history of mankind, are going to be also facing climate change in the fact is these are stories that come together, and these are youth people that really give us hope. What would you tell the youth people that are listening to us today, Martin?
Well, what I would say is, first of all, it only takes a few good women and men to bring about change. We know that because of the movement my father led. The masses of people were not involved in the modern civil rights movement of the United States of America. It was just a few good women and men. Yes, people did see the March on Washington in 1963, where my father delivered his vision for our nation and the world of freedom, justice, and equality for all humankind. But that, obviously, we are not there yet. But what I say to young people, and you know, I often hear, my wife and I are so proud of our daughter, Yolanda, for her engagement, which she has always wanted to be involved in. She's always had a sensitivity, a compassion for those who are excluded, those who are marginalized, those who have no voice. And she plans to continue to use her platform to give voice and bring light to those issues that need to be impacted, whether it's climate change, whether it's gun issues, whether it is homelessness in the United States and around the world. She will use her platform for those issues. But what I think is very interesting, and what I would say is, we can never, ever not understand that every generation has to fight to sustain the progress that has been made. You can never sit down and relax. I mean, yes, you can from time to time relax. But we have to always fight for that which is good, just, and right, and to ensure that goodness and justice and righteousness occurs. Some of that comes through legislative initiatives. So we have to make an appeal in the United States, I'll say, to our congresspersons and our senators and our governors and our mayors and our city council people and every structure that exists of governance. Young people and others have to make appeals and almost demand. And in democratic countries, we do that by our vote. I think we have to look at something a little different when it comes to countries that are not democratic. And we have to figure out, how do we help those in those particular nations where they're dictators, until the people universally come together and decide we want something different than a dictator. It's very difficult to remove dictators, because no country has the right to come in and just remove a head of state, even though unfortunately the United States from time to time and other superpowers have tried to do that. But that, in my judgment, is not the right way to ever do anything. That is not a sustainable model. Now, of course, I have to say I come from the tradition of nonviolence, so my position is totally different than some people in the world. Oftentimes we rule from strength, but we should be ruling from a level of dignity and respect and treating people like human beings. That's what my father talked about, dignity and respect, and the dignity of worth. And that is what we must promote, I believe, around the world, so that people can have sustainable models, because these models of violence, they will last maybe for some time, but ultimately violence begets violence. And so I'm just really excited about what I see happening with young people all around our nation. I hope that young people run for public office at different ages in different countries. But in the United States at 21, you can command troops in the military. So why can't you run for city council? Why can't you run for board of education? Why can't you run for state legislative office? Most of those jobs are part-time jobs. And so we need young people, not just protesting, which is good. We need you protesting, but we also need you leading, because you have a vision for the kind of nation, the kind of nations and world that you want to create for generations yet unborn.
Well, and actually, I have to say, Martin, I completely agree with you. In democratic societies, we need to be building up the defenses against racism and discrimination and institutions in law. The civil society is so important, but it's true that the youngsters, they have quite a huge impact, not only in terms of running for office, Martin, just voting. They make the difference by going to vote. And I have many examples of his stories that had happened even here in Europe. Brexit, we are not done with Brexit, but youngsters did not come out to vote. So I think that this democratic right that young people have should be used for good. And you have proved how far we can get into that. Let me just remind our friends in Facebook that you can use the following hashtags to tell everybody that you stand up for human rights with the 4 hashtag, and then hashtag fight racism. And let me go back to something that I was referring to in my previous question, Martin, because sometimes it feels that some groups accumulate disadvantages. And it can be about income, it can be an opportunity, about opportunities, and sometimes it's about the color of your skin or where you come from or your accent or where you were born. But there is always the face of a woman when the worst discrimination happens. These things converged. And so how do we also stand up for gender equality now that we're going to move into the 25th anniversary? And I have to say again that I'm very encouraged by the young populations, including Yolanda, but this is a little too much, no? Because it's even violence, and this is really unacceptable. I know you're also a gender champion, Martin, so what would you step up? How would you strengthen up, even in countries when there is illegal to discriminate against women? Why does it happen?
You know, I don't proclaim to have all of the answers, but what I will say is what I'm happy to see is more women offering themselves and running for public office. Because again, a perspective of a woman is different than, and maybe I'd go so far to say that many of the things that are problematic are issues that men created. But when more women are at the table, I know in the United States, we've elected more and more women every election cycle to office at the national level and at the state and local level. But women are the majority of persons in our nation, in the United States. And so therefore, women should also have an equal level in the political process. And I think that when that is the case, then we will see different laws that protect and preserve and lift up what women represent. So I think that's one area where we have to continue to work. But I also think that there's a new consciousness in the world. We saw the Me Too movement emerge here in the United States that is very liberating. And it's really sad that even this level of discrimination, whether it is in the form of sexual crimes, whether it is in the form of, women make less than men for doing the same job. I mean, that's really insane. And it's insensitive and it's inhumane. And those are things that must change. We cannot, as a society, continue to exploit anyone, and particularly women, the mothers of our societies. I mean, the most important people in our society, in my judgment, are our children. A nation is judged by how it treats its most precious resource. And our most precious resources are our children. And our children come through the birth canal of women. Only a woman is able to birth a child. And so we must treat women with dignity and with respect and truly in an equal way. And that, unfortunately, is slowly happening. It certainly is not fast enough. But again, we should never give up. We should never give out. We should never give in. And as long as we are making progress, or as long as we have breath in our lives, we've got to move this pendulum forward, which is what I see happening. It's far too slow in my judgment, but it is happening all over the world. And I mean, you think of a country like Saudi Arabia, where just a year or so ago, women had the right to drive. I mean, women could not drive. I mean, you had to wait on a man, to take you somewhere. I mean,
well, you cannot even have bank accounts without permission, and I mean, so by law, at least in our societies, is not by law, Martin, and some societies is by law.
Yes, but I guess what I'm saying is we are seeing change all over the world. It's far too slow, I'll say, but it is happening. And as people become more conscious and become more engaged, we will see these changes manifest in a permanent way that moves our society forward. We still have to address the issue of nationalism in the world, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the United States, whether we see Brexit as a nationalism effort, but we also see that kind of emergence in Italy. We see some of it in France. We see it in other countries. We see it, just in various parts of the world. We see the leadership, even in India, a country of almost maybe 1.5 billion people, and yet nationalism and oppression occurs in India and other places on the African continent, where many of the countries are Black Africans. You see a kind of nationalism of certain parties. So we've got a lot of issues to address, but we shouldn't be overwhelmed by those issues. We must know that we have to continue to fight these battles every day of our lives.
And you are the incarnation, Martin, because we remember the legacy of your dad. We remember the legacy of the many people that marched with your dad shoulder to shoulder. And then, of course, generations and generations get this. Maybe you are reported because you're very well known by the public, but there are hundreds of thousands of citizens around the world doing the right thing. getting NGOs out to support people, getting the fight, getting the lawyers to help people not to be discriminated. And this leads me to something that I find fascinating about your own movement, your own organization, because you want to democratize the legacy of your dad. You want to democratize this pacific way in which you really move forward the fight for human rights and for the equality of races in the U.S. Uh, how how do we bring this message home everywhere? Because yes, nationalisms are there, extremisms is there. People are not happy because the growth model and the development model that we have followed had created very few winners and a lot of losers. But how do we democratize that? And how do we use the civil society's power to advance this agenda?
So I think one of the ways we do that is first we have to understand various movements that have taken place in the world. And I'll use the modern civil rights movement because my father was one of the preeminent leaders of that movement. Well, my father wrote 6 books. And each of those books describe the methodology and the techniques that he used. And I think that, because of the internet, we can all access much of that information today. And so I think we have to do a tiny bit of research. We have to take a step back, look, read, and learn, and then apply and see if those methodologies can work in your own crisis and struggle that you're having to deal with. But there was a blueprint that he left, and that blueprint can be applied to many kinds of conflicts that exist within the world. And so I would first encourage people to actually do a little research and learn about these movements and learn about these techniques and see how do I apply this to my own situation. I think the second thing that we've got to do is again, the internet helps us to organize supporters of our causes around the world. It's amazing how you can mobilize thousands and millions of people by using the internet. Now, the issue becomes, what about those who are not connected to technology? And that is a bigger, even a more bigger challenge. I think our world has to continue to make opportunities available so that people have access and people have instruments. An instrument is expensive. In many areas, people cannot afford to buy or have those instruments. And so we have to find other ways to create an information. The highway exists. We just have to create the access. And I think we've got to challenge some of our huge content providers or internet companies, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Google, these multi-billion-dollar companies that are huge, and they could help because they made so much, then it's time for them to give something back. And so they have to be challenged to help in those areas where people do not have access and are not connected to the internet. So I think technology can be a great tool if it is available to all. And then, we have to go back to what we always had, which is imagination. I mean, think about the fact that Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. And when he was able to get out of prison, how do you spend 27 years in prison and you're there for something that there's no real reason why he was there. He did not do anything wrong. And yet they wanted him, the South African government, to basically just say that ANC, the organization that he represented, and the party was wrong. That's all he had to do, to say that the tactics that they're using are wrong, and they let him out of jail. Well, he was not going to do that because they were fighting for freedom. They were fighting for justice. And yet he came out of jail after 27 years in a small cell, and he still was able to positively impact that society and become the head of state. And that's because he used his mind. A mind is a terrible thing to waste. And no matter what, they may imprison you physically, but they can't imprison your mind. They can't imprison your dreams. They can't imprison what it is that you think. So you have to find a way to centrally focus and use that mind to know, no matter what my plight is in life, I can overcome this. That's what Mr. Mandela felt. And if we could somehow look at situations like that and say, no matter what the situation is, we can always overcome. It's easy to say that when you're in a situation where you're comfortable. It's far more challenging when you're in a situation where you have nothing at your disposal. But every day, people who come from meager or no seemingly sets of ability overrise and emerge and are able to become very successful. If anyone can do it, then everyone can. That's what I believe. And we have to start with that notion.
No,
We can,
totally. The power of mind, the power of will is just amazing. I cannot let you go, Martin, without asking you about UNESCO. First of all, because you are a very prominent American citizen, and we would love to have US back now that they are back in the world. So everything that the US Friends of UNESCO can do to get the US back to UNESCO, that will be great. But let me just ask you your advice for UNESCO. You were part of our regional consultations to step up our advice, our support. Our member countries are fully behind this anti-racism, anti-discrimination agenda, the gender agenda. We have launched a global campaign with the master classes, with trying to get out of the biases that surround us, everybody. Our intercultural dialogue, the ethics of artificial intelligence, we're working on that. But what's your advice to UNESCO to go shoulder to shoulder, as I said, with leaders like you, enlightened leaders that have always fight the good fight, and institutions like us, of course, we're there to support you. But what's your message to UNESCO so we can go then back to the trenches and move it forward?
So UNESCO, let me first of all applaud all that UNESCO has done over the years and continues to do around human rights, or around racism, around crimes of humanity, all of the things that UNESCO represents. And I plan to do all that I can to make sure we can become re-engaged as a nation. But there always is a mission of education. I want to talk a little bit about the eradication of racism. I'll say racism, poverty, and violence within the world. And UNESCO can also continue to be helpful in that plight. But racism is so vile and bitter and hostile. I always believed that if we taught diversity, sensitivity, human relations in our school systems, which certainly gives us an understanding of different peoples around the world, which certainly gives us the capacity to understand and how to interact in a human relations way, which certainly gives us the sensitivity training. And so I believe that our school systems must adopt a framework that says we will incorporate these trainings so that when a child goes from first grade to 12th grade, that he or she is exposed in a different way. And then he or she interacts with others around the world in a different way. Oftentimes we're socialized by what we're exposed to. So when we're exposed to much broader circumstances, different ethnic groups, different religious groups, different societal norms, the exposure helps us to interact and deal, because we have to learn how to deal with each other as human beings. And when we treat, it goes back to dignity and respect and worth. When we treat everyone with dignity and respect and treat them as human beings should be treated, we create a different paradigm. My dad used to talk about, in the United States and really in the world, we needed a revolution of values. And I think today that is part of what we still need, a revolution of values, not just in this nation, but perhaps around the world. But as consciousness becomes more awoken, as it is happening around the world, we're going to begin to see these movements become not just conflated, because we need people coalescing. We need coalition efforts to move the needle. But UNESCO is doing a phenomenal job. And I'll say, again, I'm going to do my part to help the United States get back in the fold. And I hope that this administration, my hope is this administration certainly is going to be dramatically more open than the current administration that is there today. And we're gonna, I believe we're gonna see some different things coming out of the United States. Hopefully that impacts the world, and hopefully we all together can create what my father talked about was the beloved community. He talked about that in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. I hope people will somehow get a hold of that either online. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Very profound and prophetic title.
Totally.
Obviously he wanted us to go to a community. That was over 53 years ago when he wrote that book. Excuse me. We need community today.
You are completely right. This has been a fantastic conversation with Martin Luther King III. Community of values. That's what we cherish. That's what has brought us together in this very enlightened conversation with our friends from Facebook. We will keep on talking about these issues, but I just want to say that it has been a magnificent way to celebrate Human Rights Day. This is Gabriela Ramos, Assistant Director General for Social and Human Science, and it has been my pleasure to interview Martin. Thank you so much. And until the next time, stay safe.
And you too. Thank you.